What's up guys, so we're back with another Warhammer 40k lore video. If you're new channel, welcome. We're going to be checking out another video by More Lore, so shout out and credit goes to More Lore for the video. And this one is called Every Single Faction in Warhammer 40k Explained. Now when it comes to factions, I can only think of just a few. Like maybe the Space Marines, so like the Imperium. I don't know if that counts as a faction, but what were they called? The Tau, T-A-U, Tau Empire or something like that, and Necrons. Would the Chaos Gods count as a faction? Okay, you know what? I'm gonna save myself embarrassment and not say anything wrong, so let's just jump right into the video.
The universe of Warhammer 40k is a richly woven tapestry made up of thousands of threads, all forming the sprawling designs that form the robust lore base for this franchise. The largest parts of those patterns are the many factions that inhabit this setting, each representing a race or grouping of peoples with years of established lore that has been written, lost, changed, reworked, and reimagined.
Outdated.
As such, it can be easy to get lost in this literal galaxy of cultures, even for those who have been immersed in this universe for years. So, let us offer to guide you on a brief tour of the people who make the 40k universe alive. These are the factions of 40k. It would be impossible to start a list like this with anyone other than the Imperium of Man. Humanity in the 42nd millennium is a diverse, sprawling mass of people, trillions and trillions of citizens, turning the massive grinding wheels of an uncaring, unkind society broken into billions of fiefs, baronies, concords, and autocracies, and at the very top, a small group of deeply corrupt individuals propping up the barely living corpse of a god who dared to dream of a galaxy ruled by Terra. Like any fascist dictatorship, the Imperium controls its citizens through the threat of force and propaganda, and everything revolves around citizens.
This one at the right bottom. Spot the difference. What's to say? GI and figure 2. One of these guardsmen is a traitor. Can't really tell. You know what?
Through the threat of force and propaganda, and everything revolves around the ever-present struggle for survival. Entire planets and systems are given over to specific production uses, and every single person is meant to live and die for the God Emperor. They are pressed into service running factories, churning out weapons and ammunition. They are whipped into growing food for entire sectors of blasted battlefields that can no longer sustain life, and of course, they are conscripted in their billions to feed into the ever-burning furnace of war. This is life as a human in the 42nd millennium. It wasn't always like this, of course. Humanity went through its golden age where we developed technology so fantastical it bordered on magic and spread to every corner of the galaxy. And then in our hubris, we fell. Our civilization fractured into isolated pockets that would war amongst each other for millennia. It was in this age of strife that the Emperor appeared, a gleaming golden god possessing incredible psychic powers and the knowledge of technology long lost to us. He rose up and conquered Terra using genetically engineered soldiers before setting his sights on the stars. The next part is important, but probably best left for another video, so here's the broad strokes. Knowing the dangerous power of chaos, the Emperor decided to fight back with his genetically engineered children, the Primarchs. These were promptly stolen by the Chaos Gods and scattered across the universe, but not before the Emperor could use their genetic material to design a new force of super soldiers, the Space Marines. He took these Marines on a whirlwind tour of the galaxy, linking up with those pockets of humanity left behind during the Age of Strife, and also finding his lost sons along the way. Unfortunately, as many of us know, family can be complicated, and inside a few short centuries of warfare, half of them turned on the Emperor and his new Imperium. These rebellions never tend to work. Half of them turned on the Emperor and
heretics, yeah. Let's see. Death Guard, World Eaters, Thousand Suns, Iron Warriors. Word Bearers, Sons of Horus. Yep. And of course, my favorite, Dark Angels. Yeah, a lot of you guys have been like making fun of me as well, saying like my favorite legion are heretics. I mean, like I get it, but either way, I'm still gonna like the Dark Angels no matter what.
His new Imperium. These rebellions never tend to work out though, and the sons who sided with War Master Horus, the Emperor's favorite son who had fallen to the whispered promises of chaos, were either killed or chased into hiding with their legions of Space Marines. But in the fighting, the Emperor was mortally wounded and was bound in a life-saving device known as the Golden Throne. Kept alive, but only just. His psychic might powering a beacon that allows humanity to travel across the galaxy using the warp as a shortcut to this day. It was during the next 10,000 years that the Imperium became what it is now, with many different forces and systems being created to prop up failing or stagnating ones. We have the Space Marines, of course. The super soldiers created by the Emperor survive to this day, fighting as the sharpest point of humanity's spear against the darkness. Then there's the Imperial Guard, or Astra Militarum, the grand armies of the Imperium that are made of regular humans acting as a bulwark against the many dangers that constantly threaten to destroy us.
Yep.
The Mechanicum of Mars, secretive druids who control all technology in the Imperium and constantly search for what was lost during the Age of Strife. They are jealous and superstitious, often only able to build or repair objects through memorized rituals. And the Inquisition, the Watchers who watch the Watchmen. The Inquisition are spies and investigators, duty-bound to hunt down the most insidious threats to humanity, even from inside the very organizations that hold us up. The alien, the mutant, and the heretic are the targets of this shadowy organization. There are, of course, many more than we have time to go over here, but it's important to be clear that the Imperium of the 42nd millennium is a faction constantly at war with itself, spread so thin across the stars that there could be no hope of running a functioning society, even with fear. Sitting parallel to reality.
Also, I remember that to keep the Emperor alive, they need to like sacrifice 1,000 souls a day to keep him alive. So that was insane. So next, Chaos. I'm assuming he's gonna be talking about the 4 Chaos gods, but I just want to say on the Imperium that I know that with the Space Marines and the Astra Militarum, what I noticed about in the Space Marine 2 gameplay is the Astra Militarum. They may be normal humans and all that, but I always thought that they were gonna be like, cannon fodder, just like send out bodies here and there. But in Space Marine 2, they pretty much just function just like a regular military. Like they're not just throwing bodies out there. They're actually making sure they're holding up defenses, fighting, and all that. So I don't know. I just want to share that. So, anyways, let's just jump into the next faction, the Chaos.
Reality lies the nightmare realm of the warp. A writhing, bubbling soup made primarily of the thoughts and emotions of sentient creatures from the beginning of time. In those uncounted eons, terrifying predators have slowly gained form and sentience, some more powerful than others, but each representing an aspect of reality like a dark mirror. In the ancient days of the universe, the warp was known as the Sea of Souls and was relatively calm. People like the mysterious Old Ones and the ancient Eldari were able to tap into the sea and use its power to work miracles. But in the course of time, and with the things that sentient creatures do, such as love and hate and make war especially, those predators in the warp grew fat and strong, and so did the gods of chaos take form. Horn the blood god, born of hate and rage, Nurgle, bearer of plagues, born of despair and the fear of death, Tzeentch the Changebringer, born of ambition and the desire for change, and finally much later, Slaanesh, the prince of pleasure and excess, born of greed and lust. These creatures immediately began spinning their webs across reality, seducing mortals and searching for ways to break in and, well, cause chaos. In the history of Warhammer 40k, the Chaos Gods are most responsible for completely ruining the plans of the Emperor, Terra's Golden Protector. They turned several of his Primarch sons, and in doing so, gained almost 9 full legions of Space Marines to command. And it's through these forces and the billions of cultists seeded across human worlds that the galaxy primarily knows chaos. It would not be unfair to think that if humanity were to be completely destroyed, then chaos itself would be dealt a death blow from which it might never recover, and the Sea of Souls would be rendered safe once again. Old, wise, cunning, and self-righteous, the Eldari of the Asuryani are the last survivors of a broken race who once controlled the galaxy. The Eldari were one of the first peoples created by the mysterious Old Ones at the dawn of time, and were clearly the favorites. The Old Ones shared much of their wisdom with the ancient Eldari, and when they disappeared at the end of the War in Heaven, their elf-like children inherited their most impressive creation, the Webway. The ability to travel across the galaxy quickly without having to pass through the Chaos Realm of the Warp gave the Eldari a huge advantage over the other races, even if the Warp at that time was not as dangerous as it is in the 42nd millennium. Using the Webway, the Eldari flourished and quickly came to rule the galaxy. It wasn't long afterwards that things started getting worse. The Eldari are a race that experiences things to a greater extreme than most other creatures. They feel things more keenly, more intensely, and most of their kind have some level of psychic power. Unchecked, this led the Eldari civilization to devolve into hedonism on a scale we humans couldn't possibly imagine. The Asuryani are descended from the Eldari, who saw the warning signs of their collapsing empire and decided to flee into deep space aboard continent-sized ships called craft worlds. Here, they rode out the dying gasps of their old society and formed a new one based on rigid paths designed to guide the powerful minds of their people so as to avoid the horrors that had nearly destroyed them all.
I have terror.
Led by powerful psychers, ancient war leaders, and constructs powered by their honored dead, the Asuryani fight to right the wrongs of their civilization, which gave birth to a whole new god of chaos, and to perhaps gain the slim chance of a future for their dwindling kind. The Drakari are the last remnants of the old Eldari Empire, living uninhibited and reveling in the excess of lived experiences. That part definitely sounds like the functional opposite of their Craftworld cousins, but it's the content of those experiences that takes this comparison away from Dark Mirror and firmly into something else. When the old Eldari Empire began to fracture, it was at the very height of its depravity. Cannibalism, substance abuse, assault, murder, the Eldari had become a race lost in the swirling tempest of their own emotions, and had embraced cruelty as an art form. This is what led to the fall, the explosive punctuation of all the psychic power put out by the uninhibited Eldari gave birth to the Chaos God Slaanesh, a crescendo of depravity that consumed the heart of their galaxy-spanning empire in the space of a single heartbeat, with a gaping wound in reality called the Eye of Terror to stand as its grave marker. Those highly placed in the old society have fled into the Webway to survive, too late to join the craft worlds, but just quick enough to avoid the full consequences of their misdeeds. Here, in a small pocket of the Webway, under the glow of several stolen stars, they took residence in the city of Kamara, the most important Webway port ever built by the Eldari Empire. They hid from Slaanesh and began making forays into real space, fetching slaves and searching for methods to avoid the grasp of She Who Thirsts. Instead of changing their ways, the Drakari maintained their sadistic lifestyle, eventually figuring out how to use the pain and suffering of other creatures to extend their lives, and they truly delight in it. The cabals that rule Kamara are at constant odds with each other, sniping and jabbing, looking for any way to gain control, be it by blackmail, intrigue, or outright assassination. The old nobility of the Eldari Empire became homunculi, mad scientists who experiment even on their own flesh for a variety of reasons, pleasure being one of them. And all the while, the witch covens fight in the grand arenas with slaves and monsters, gaining longevity through the thrill of extreme experiences and the love of bloodshed. Out of the black...
Wow. That was a lot going on. A lot of pain, a lot of suffering, a lot of inflicting torture, and all that. That's insane. Now, the next one, the Tyranids. I know the Tyranids very well because, you know, that was the main enemy in Space Marine 2.
nothingness between galaxies drifted the hive fleets of the Tyranids in the late 41st millennium. Taking the other races by surprise, these creatures stripped whole worlds of life before moving on to new ones, like a horde of terrifying alien locusts. But it quickly became apparent that the Tyranids were not mindless beasts, they were guided by a massively oppressive intelligence which formed complex plans and invasion routes and could even blot out the pervasive touch of the warp itself. The bioforms of the Tyranids are many and change constantly in response to new threats, ensuring that any method of beating them is quickly erased. Each group of these monsters are also guided by a powerful synapse creature, which acts as a focus for the hive mind and a useful way to guide the swarm across trillions of battlefields at the same time. The real terror of this menace is that it comes from outside our galaxy, implying that these creatures have already devoured at least one other, but also that the overwhelming forces of hive fleets we've faced already could represent only a fraction of their number. A scout force looking for fresh biomass the same way gene stealers guide their parent swarms. Across the many threats to life in 40k, it can be difficult to say which faction represents the most pressing danger, but in the face of the Tyranids, the answer becomes very clear. If the peoples of the galaxy can't learn to work together, the Great Devourer will have the ultimate victory. The next title is Orcs. The warlike orcs are easily another one of these potentially galaxy-destroying threats, or they would be if they ever united. The average orc boy is a large, meaty slab of muscle with green skin and large tusks. Starting out, they normally stand at least a head tall.
Okay, foolish and clumsy, the orc will come at you with his cleaver. It will be a simple matter to catch his hand at the wrist as shown. Like an instructions manual, like self-defense book, Self-Defense Against the Orcs, Volume 1. Grab it by the wrist.
Taller than even the tallest human, but continually grow over the course of their lives according to their importance in their warband. So, while orcs tend to lead short, violent lives, those that can survive longer than a couple of battles tend to grow to truly monstrous sizes, with stories from the Great Crusade reporting powerful orc war bosses the size of multi-story buildings. The orcs and their subspecies, like Gretchen, Snotlings, and Squigs, are a species of sentient or nearly sentient fungi, multiplying by way of spores that disperse when an orc dies. This method of reproduction not only makes a greenskin infestation hard to stamp out, but also explains why they easily outnumber every other race in the galaxy. And those numbers come into play quite a bit, with gatherings of orcs creating a low-level psychic field that only their shamans and weird boys can seem to take advantage of. For an orc, powerful belief literally makes things happen, leading to impossible machinery and surgeries to actually work when used or done to an orc. Adding to that, individual orcs are some of the hardest creatures to kill in existence, able to shrug off shockingly extreme injuries to keep fighting, which is their favorite pastime. As we mentioned earlier, orc society is balanced through pure violence. The more successful an individual orc is, the bigger they grow, the more violence they can carry out, and on until someone larger comes along and stops the train. An orc is constantly fending off challenges to their authority, but once they get truly massive, they basically can't be stopped. This also holds true on the large scale with warbands and clans forming behind large successful bosses, eventually leading to a Waaagh, the orc version of a crusade, which spreads a wave of peak orc violence across whole sectors of space in search of a good scrap. The orc gods are similarly vicious, with Gork being cunning and brutal, while Mork is brutal yet cunning. We're sure this won't surprise you at this point, but the orcs frequently fight over which god is best, while also mistaking them for each other. Where the orcs came from, no one knows. Orc legend says that they were created by a lost subspecies called the Brain Boys, who engineered them to be the meanest and greenest. But a greater likelihood would be that they were created by the Old Ones as either a hardy construction force or as a last-ditch effort to win the war in heaven against the Necrons and their Catan patrons. But their constant need to fight is actually why they're not likely to ever become a larger threat than the Tyranids, Necrons, or the forces of chaos. Orcs love fighting so much that they're constantly fighting each other, smashing themselves into many smaller empires, all fighting themselves and anything else that happens to get within Crumpin distance. We have very little.
They kind of remind me like the orcs in Lord of the Rings, because when I played Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War, they always like the only way they can get promoted is to kill each other, like kill an officer or a captain or something like that. But if they want to get noticed or promote even higher, then they kill humans. So the only time they would like really work together is if they have a common enemy like a human. But pretty much besides that, it was always civil war against each other. They're raiding each other, they're assassinating each other, they're executing each other. So it just reminds me of that every time I hear about the orcs in Warhammer 40k, it reminds me of the orcs in Lord of the Rings. Now, Necrons.
Recorded lore from the beginning of our galaxy's history, but what we do know for sure is that it was dominated largely by two of the very first sentient races, the immortal, all-powerful Old Ones and the Necrontyr. Living in some of the most hostile areas of space, the Necrontyr led very short, painful lives, plagued by heavy radiation and solar winds. Every new system they spread to seemed to have the same problems. It was said that Necrontyr cities were built to be mausoleums, with larger and more grand homes being built for the dead than there were for the living. With this sort of grim life comes two things: strife and bitterness. Seeking to end the pain, the Necrontyr asked the Old Ones for help and were denied. The two races had been feuding for territory since they had encountered one another, and it had led to what the Necrontyr felt was an unfair advantage for the seemingly godlike Old Ones. This is how the war in heaven began, and almost immediately, the Old Ones had the upper hand. They were masters of not only technology like the webway, which allowed them to quickly and safely travel the galaxy, but they had access to psychic powers fueled by the warp. Within a few short centuries of fighting, the Necrontyr had been pushed back to their radiation-blasted homeworlds and forgotten. It was in this despair and anger that the Catan found them. Beings who fed on the very stars themselves, these parasitic creatures had power and knowledge of advanced technology that could even the playing field and allow the Necrontyr to take their revenge on the Old Ones. All they had to do was transfer themselves from their weak, fleshy bodies and into ones made of glorious living metal. But
the first time I ever saw a Necron, do you know what's the first thing that came to my mind? It kind they kind of look like a Metallo from DC. It's one of Superman's rivals, like a cyborg powered by kryptonite. I mean, it looks almost exactly the same. A metallic cyborg-looking creature with green. Come on, man. I don't know if DC copied them or Necrons copied them, but either way, that's the comparison I first saw the first time I ever saw a Necron. Metallo from DC.
this was a trick, played on them by the Catan known as the Deceiver. As soon as the rites of biotransference began, it was clear they had been played, as the Necrontyr traded their souls for the chance to live forever, and the Catan absorbed the cast-off life essence to grow much stronger. Only the strongest were even able to keep their minds intact, and even then, some were already losing their sense of individuality. The Catan were now too strong to even consider rebelling against, and so the Necrontyr instead decided to finish the Old Ones and bide their time. They had become the Necrons. The fighting was brutal and swift. With their new bodies and the technology granted by the Catan, the Necrons swept the Old Ones aside, reaching even their strongholds inside the webway. Stars were collapsed and whole systems razed before the war in heaven was won for the Necrons. And it's here that they chose to turn on the Catan, tearing them apart while the star gods were distracted with the recent victory. Once this was done, the Necrons saw that the creations of the Old Ones, the Eldari and the Orcs, among many others, were growing more numerous and would one day beat them with sheer numbers, and so they chose to retreat deep under the surface of their worlds and sleep the millennia away. And the galaxy they came back to in the 41st millennia was one of turmoil and strife, with the creations of the Old Ones vying for control, while monsters from the Sea of Souls threatened to destroy reality itself. Sleep could no longer be justified. The Necron would have to clean up this mess once and for all.
So Necrons are really, really old. But I didn't know that their story was like that. I thought they were just maybe some machines that, like, kind of like the Terminator, became self-aware and just started attacking. All right, the Tau. I don't know much about the Tau Empire. So this is gonna be brand new to me because out of all the factions, the Imperium and Chaos, Chikari a little bit, and the Orcs I knew a little bit, but Necrons and Tau I do not know.
Oldest race to the youngest, the Tau burst onto the galactic scene in early M41. This young race of territorial aliens have
So they're
become
young.
known for their bold use of advanced technology and the speed at which they adapt to new situations. Originally discovered by an Imperial survey team in the 35th millennium, the Tau were simple hunter-gatherers who hadn't yet formed societies. Soon after, a warp storm cut off their planet from further Imperial meddling, and by the time it had cleared, over 6,000 years later, the Tau had advanced to a fully interplanetary species capable of challenging the Imperium on the battlefield. The Tau are people marked by distinct biological differences according to the conditions they evolved in. During the early part of their history, Tau from the plains were particularly aggressive, while the Tau from the mountains evolved slender bodies, hollow bones, and flaps of skin so they could glide. This rapid change in physical attributes led to large-scale war during their Black Powder era, a time they called the Montau. It was then that the first ethereals appeared. The ethereals had an uncanny ability to calm those around them, a quiet authority that seemed to compel other Tau to listen and overcome their differences. Imperial scientists suspect this effect is a low-level psychic field or perhaps a trick using pheromones, but whatever the source of this ability, the ethereals not only stopped the wars from ravaging Tau society, but quickly reordered it into what we see today, a rigid caste-based civilization where each member knows their place and works towards the greater good. Once unified, the Tau began to rapidly expand through their local star system and then beyond. Even though they didn't have the ability to travel faster than light or through the warp, they encountered several alien species during their first expansion, absorbing most of them into their empire, similarly to how colonization was achieved on Terra in the 20th century. Most new species were seemingly happy to join the empire, but not everyone. The Orcs were the most notable exception, and it was in their fighting with the Greenskins that the Tau honed their skills in warfare. Then came the first fights with the behemoth that is the Imperium of Man. Fighting during the Damocles Crusade showed the Tau that they were hopelessly outmatched by the gargantuan scale of the Imperium, but they were able to fight them on the small scale, and so when they were saved from the full might of the Imperial war machine by the Tyranid invasion on Macra, the Tau took advantage of the lull in fighting to expand again. And this has largely been the way the Tau have survived through the last millennium or so. They are a very adaptable people and are able to spot opportunities at a moment's notice. It also doesn't hurt that the Imperium keeps getting into huge fights with other galactic threats, so they can never really seem to pay attention to the little blue aliens.
So the Tau are very strategic and tactical. They are, as he said, willing to adapt and seize advantages. So looks like they had a leap forward in warfare, fighting against the Orcs. They I don't know if they enslaved, but if they forced like tribes to like join their empire, I guess they did. So they are no match for the Imperium. So if there was no other enemies, so it was just Tau versus the Imperium, then the Tau would have been wiped out. But because the Imperium was busy with other factions to fight, like the Orcs and all that, that's how the Tau managed to slip by, and taking advantage of the distractions, they managed to improve and expand. So they got lucky. Because one thing I learned, they're no match against the Imperium.
In the galactic core dwell the Leagues of Votan, the cloned descendants of miners, explorers, and settlers sent out on generation ships from the pre-imperial Terra. Hundreds of fleets dove into the dense gravity of the core, trusting their ancestor AI cores that they called the Votan. It was these advanced AI that guided the survivors in the construction of holds for them to live, clone skeins for them to grow resistant to heavy gravity and the mutating powers of chaos, and the colossal particle excavators that allowed the kindred to dismantle still-forming stars for rare elements that made them fantastically wealthy. The reliance on cloning eventually led to a diminished size, dwarfing the survivors over the generations into squat but hardy people who spent most of their time amongst themselves.
They look like
and though
dwarves.
they still acknowledge their ancient link to Terra, These people want nothing to do with the superstitious Imperium, choosing instead to gather in groups of kindred called leagues around the millennia's old AI constructs that they now take their name from. That being said, the wealth gained by being one of the very few races hardy enough to withstand the conditions in the galactic core has to go somewhere, and so the Leagues of Votann quite frequently end up bartering with other civilizations, and some kindred have even formed prospector fleets that search the wider galaxy for similarly rich areas to exploit. These tough space dwarves have built a culture around a symbiotic relationship with their environment and their technology, which the Imperium technophobic leadership would seek to destroy or claim for themselves if they knew, and of course the kindred are very careful not to let them. If the Imperium ever found out that the Leagues of Votann were actually long-lost human settlers instead of mysterious squat Xenos, they would surely attempt to lay claim to their entire civilization. For that reason, the kindred are much more happy to live near and work with other Xeno species like the Tau and the Eldari. Both the newest and one of the oldest factions in 40k, these squats might be different from what some of us Longbeards remember, but it's good to have them back on the table all the same.
Oh, they're that old?
The universe of Warhammer 40k is wide and diverse with a colorful array of players on its stage. So much rich story, in fact, that it feels almost like a disservice to cover them all so briefly here. There is, however, more than enough Legendarium to do deeper dives into not just individual factions, but the distinct armies and sub-factions that make them up. So, if you have a particular need to hear about any of these colorful players in the grimmest of dark futures, do let us know in the comments below. And of course, if this is your first time seeing our videos, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like so that you never find yourself without more lore.
You know what, guys? I'm gonna say it. Warhammer 40k is space Lord of the Rings. I mean, it has everything the Lord of the Rings has. Man, elves, orcs, dwarves. Come on, man. But either way, I'm gonna ask the simple question. Which faction that was mentioned in this video is your guys' favorite? For me, I'm just gonna go with the Imperium because of the Space Marines, and it's the most familiar to me. Because I did not know much about the Tau Empire. I did not know much about the League. At the end there, crap. League of Dwell. Wait, are they called? Yeah, Leagues of. I'm so sorry. Leagues of Votann. And I mean, the Necrons look pretty cool, and I don't know. The Orcs, they'll be hard to control. I mean, they just want to constantly fight, but there's no stability or order with them. So I'm gonna have to go with Imperium because of the Space Marines, and also after playing them in Space Marine 2, which was a lot of fun. So that's my choice. But I would like to hear your guys' choices. Which faction is your guys' favorite and why? Please let me know in the comments below. And also, again, shout out and credit goes to More Lore for the video. So besides that, that's all I got for today, guys. So thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you guys for watching. Hit that notification bell so you know when I drop another video. And also shout out to all my members, subscribers, viewers. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for your support, guys. I really do appreciate it. So without anything else, see you guys next time.